Welcome back to WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. It's football season, I know, because we've already got an injury report. Luke Jones joins us now from Owings Mills amidst all of our Hall of Fame conversations. We're excited about Ed Reed going into Canton this week. Luke, it didn't take long. I mean, we get downtown on Saturday night. I personally, I like the purple and white game. Lots of fans, lots of people who otherwise wouldn't have access to watching the team play. And RG3 hits his hand. John Harbaugh says, say a prayer, and lo and behold, the prayer is now, well, let's hope he's not out too long in September, right?
Yeah, and I mean, of course it's unfortunate. You never want to have injuries, but you also know you're going to have injuries. And if you're going to have an injury to a quarterback, you'd rather it be your backup quarterback. So it's not ideal. I don't want to be dismissive about it, especially when your starting quarterback is someone who runs around and is mobile, and we know the history of mobile quarterbacks in this league, but doesn't sound like it's going to be something that lingers too long. If he's not ready for the start of the season, it would appear, based on the timetables reported, based on what the Ravens have said, which John Harbaugh's statement said at least a few weeks. That leads you to believe that it's going to be a little longer than a few weeks, so don't expect to see him in the preseason, but it doesn't sound like he should be out for the season or anything extreme like that. But it's unfortunate, and for me it's a reminder of, especially talking about quarterbacks, one, it's why you want your defensive players to stay away from your quarterbacks in the summer and in a practice venue, but it also reminds you that how easily something can happen for a quarterback, and almost makes you kind of ask, why doesn't that happen more frequently almost? So I think for the Ravens, clearly it's not Lamar Jackson going down, so it's not the catastrophic scenario. The silver lining is it gives Trace McSorley some more reps in the meantime, but certainly the Ravens adding another quarterback, at least in the interim, to take snaps in the preseason and share some of the workload in practices. But beyond that, you hope it's not something overly consequential for the season, because we've said all along, just like we said this for years with Joe Flacco, if Lamar Jackson goes down for any period of extended time, the outlook for this team changes dramatically. So it's not as though RG3 is viewed as someone who's going to come in and be the savior if Jackson goes down. So in that regard, it doesn't really change their overall outlook for 2019, in my opinion.
Well, the emotions around this on Saturday night were interesting as well, because as much as it's a backup quarterback injury, there's a mentorship thing here that's going on with RG3 and Lamar Jackson that we can all assume, but I think it was very obvious the relationship that was there Saturday night after the concern with RG3 and the concern for him and the pain he was in out on the field.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a bond there. I think for as much as we talked about the dynamic between Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson last year and how that could have been way more awkward than it ended up being, and I think everyone was professional about it, I think Griffin very much had a role in that. Not necessarily that he was a liaison, but he's someone who was kind of the best of both worlds. He was a little bit more of a veteran who was, even though he's much younger than Joe Flacco, 3, 4, 5 years younger than Flacco, but a little more of a veteran who'd been in the league for a number of years, but at the same time, someone who has a skill set very similar to Lamar Jackson. So I think he's someone who fit into that quarterback room very well, and in the case of what he means for Lamar, I mean, I thought it was interesting. It's one thing for Griffin to show some of the emotion that he did on the field after practice was over, when you could tell that something was wrong, whether it was out a few weeks or if he was out for the entire season and had torn ligaments or something like that. You could tell that he was distraught. You could tell he was disappointed. But I thought what was interesting to me in the post-practice locker room when Lamar Jackson was asked about it, he almost it almost sounded like his voice cracked. Now, he was a little hoarse after the stadium practice, but you could tell that he was a little bit emotional, expressing some concern for his teammate, his fellow quarterback, and someone that's been not his only mentor, but someone who has been a mentor for him. So again, the good news is it doesn't sound like Griffin's going to be out an extended period of time into the regular season, but I think in the meantime, and we saw this on Sunday, to his credit, RG3 was still dressed on the practice field, suited up. Wasn't throwing the football, of course, but he was kind of doing the old shadow ball, shadow boxing, so to speak, going through his steps, going through his passing mechanics, doing all those types of things, and staying as active as he could with a thumb that he can't use with a football or anything like that. So I think in that regard, you kind of got a sense of, I don't know if he's going to do that every day or every practice over the next few weeks or however long he's out, but it does give you a sense of the dedication that he has for himself to want to be out there and still to be out there for Lamar Jackson and Trace McSorley.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. Luke at WNST.net. I am Horse. We are covering all things training camp. Of course, the morning newspaper, the tech service, all in the bio, Toyota.com, Audio Vault all week long, and Hall of Fame conversations that have never been heard before. We have over 140 different conversations here this week that we will air, so you'll be hearing those in addition to whatever else is going on at training camp between now and next Thursday when the Jacksonville Jaguars begin fake football. You've been out there watching a lot of practice, Luke. Just some general observations from the first weekend.
Well, I think first and foremost, and I wrote about this at WNST.net, and you can check it out right now, after the first day of practice where, keeping in mind it had been some 5 or 6 weeks since the last full-team practice, Lamar Jackson looked really rusty the first 90 minutes or so. Balls fluttering, he threw an interception. It was pretty ugly. I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. He's been really consistent since then. And let me be clear about this. I'm not saying 5,000-yard, 40-yard touchdown kind of look, but for the most part, he's shown pretty good accuracy. I think he's shown an improved spiral. I don't know if he's ever going to spin the ball like Joe Flacco at his peak in terms of a perfect tight spiral, but his spiral has looked a little more consistent. And I think what he's been able to do against the secondary that, for my money, is probably the best in the NFL, or certainly one of the 2 or 3 best in the league, he's been able to kind of take what the defense has given him and make some plays to Mark Andrews. We've seen him make plays to Miles Boykin. Seth Roberts, he seems to be building a little bit of a rapport with, but he's looked really steady. Maybe not spectacular, but I think he's been really steady, and we've seen that over the course of multiple practices, and it's easily the most consistent he's looked over an extended period of time. Now, it's very early. We're talking about late July, and in the same way that I remember Buck Showalter talking about how guys would perform in spring training and guys would perform in September with 40-man roster call-ups, it can be a great fuller, and I can run off a list of different guys who've looked really good in the spring or in the first 2 weeks of summer, and then things change once the offense and defense is fully installed, once you get into the preseason, and certainly when you get into the regular season. But for all of the scrutiny that Lamar Jackson has been under, and much of it fair and some of it over the top, and people really being unreasonable talking about a 21-year-old quarterback last year, and the youngest quarterback to ever start a playoff game, I've seen growth. And I think that's what you want to see this time of year. You understand what it is, and you're not making bold proclamations, but you've certainly seen more consistency out of him, and especially Saturday night for somewhere around 30,000 Ravens fans that were in the stadium. They saw Lamar Jackson in the offense put on a show, and that's not to say that they completely picked apart the defense, but they made their plays, and that's what you want to see. You don't want to see interceptions all over the field. You don't want to see fluttering passes all over the field. It's not as though there's not a long way to go still, but I've been encouraged from what I've seen from him, and I think beyond how the passing has looked, I think he just looks like he's in command out there. On Saturday night, one of his teammates, Kenneth Dixon, on a couple occasions didn't appear to be lining up in the right spot, and Jackson kind of assertively pushed him in the right direction of where to line up. Not in a malicious way, but in a take charge kind of way, which is what you want from your quarterback. On Sunday, there was a rash of false start penalties from the second-team offensive line, and we didn't hear what Lamar Jackson said, but he went over to the huddle and clearly offered a few words to them, whether it was, hey, get your butts in gear, or, hey, guys, shake it off. that's some leadership that you're seeing from a 22-year-old, and those are the types of things that I think we saw glimpses of last year for someone young and inexperienced. We talked about how players gravitated to him. I think you're seeing that grow in year two, and that's exactly what you want to see if this thing's ultimately going to work out in the end.
Well, we've been talking about that for 8 months, right? It's been all talk until last week because the last time we looked up, San Diego was, or I call them San Diego, the Chargers were coming in. People in San Diego don't call them San Diego anymore. The Chargers were coming in here beating us, and man, it really does feel like a long, long time ago, right? Like, this feels like the longest of all off seasons. This was not a quick off season, man. Maybe the Orioles were involved or whatever, but it feels like last season was a long, long time ago, and it feels like we've been talking about this forever. It's nice to actually see it out on the field.
That's right. And again, me saying this and me writing this at WNST.net doesn't mean that Lamar Jackson is going to be an all-pro, or doesn't mean that what he's doing in late July is automatically going to carry over, but it's sure better than the alternative, right? I mean, it's all we have to go off of right now, and I think you made an interesting point. We've talked about this so much. We've seen this roster in general undergo so much change. We've seen the front office undergo change with Eric DaCosta officially being the guy as the general manager now. So there's so much unknown, and I've talked a lot about variance and all the possibilities for this team, and talking about I feel how, with some of the youth that they have, especially on the offensive side of the ball, but also on the defensive side with some of the veterans they're replacing, I think there is a little more upside potentially because you're talking about young players who aren't finished products. But we've also talked about the fact that the floor is lower, and you could also envision more things going wrong, whether it's Jackson, whether it's the offensive line, whether it's the wide receivers not stepping forward the way they need these young guys to, whether it's the pass rush, whether it's inside linebacker, whether it's Earl Thomas not looking like the six-time Pro Bowler in Seattle before the two leg injuries in the last 3 years. I mean, there's all types of different things you can point to and say, well, that might not go right, but at the same time, there are plenty of things you can point to and say, what if that player pops? What if that group ends up being a little bit better than people expect? That's when you do talk about the upside. So when you have that many questions, you understand that not everything's going to work out perfectly, and I certainly have my concerns about this football team, and Lamar Jackson's still a question. I'm not saying he isn't, but when you're seeing some of the positive signs early in camp, that's when you, as a fan, you dare to dream that, hey, maybe if Lamar Jackson has figured out this passing thing to at least be, say, an average starting quarterback in the passing department, and then you understand, and we've seen the special athleticism he has, then you have something there, and that's where it gets exciting. So it's been a good start to camp in that regard, RG3 injury aside, and I think you just want to see that continue and just see the steady performance, and I think that's what we've seen from him really since about midway through that first practice, and that's been encouraging.
Luke, I guess aside from all of this football, I want to say Adley Rutschman to you because it's been a month since we've talked about that, and lo and behold, he's causing traffic jams on 95, right?
Yeah, and we knew this was going to happen. I mean, the plan all along was for him to get his feet wet a little bit in the Gulf Coast League, and he did that. Saw him hit up. We all saw the Twitter video of him hitting the home run in his first Gulf Coast game, but they wanted him to get his professional sea legs a little bit, so to speak, and then he was going to go to Aberdeen. And had an 0 for debut, got a hit in his second game, and in his second game catching, even threw out a couple runners trying to steal. So it's good to see. And to be very clear, short seasons, single A Aberdeen shouldn't be a level that tests him to a dramatic degree. But it is professional baseball, and you don't want to rush him. I mean, the Orioles aren't in a situation where they want to start his service clock any time sooner than they really need to without it being too obvious.
And they don't want him hitting his hand on a helmet either, right?
Well, sure. You want to be careful in that regard. And he did have a little bit of a bout of mono, which was something that kind of slowed him down. Probably would have been in Aberdeen at least a week or two earlier. But
if you ever had mono, you probably wouldn't say it was a little bit of one.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's definitely something that can zap your energy when you consider everything he went through playing.
I never had it. The girls didn't kiss me, so sorry.
But for him, I mean, all the accolades and some of the recognition and playing in the NCAAs and all of that, certainly he's had a lot on his plate. So I think him getting to Aberdeen now will settle in. The weather will be a little bit better than playing in the Gulf Coast League, as Buck Showalter used to nickname it, the Gulf Roast League, because of how hot it would be in Sarasota in the middle of the summer. But gives him a chance to settle in, get some at-bats. They're primarily going to use him as a DH this year, because I think the focus is much more on just him getting at-bats, although he's going to catch, sounds like he'll catch 3, maybe 4 times a week, but because his defense is considered to be so polished, they don't want to give him too much of a workload on the heels of the college season. But you want to see him have success. And if that means they call him up to Delmarva for a postseason run in September, then great. And I think that's something that if he hits well in August, that would make a heck of a lot of sense. So I think it's so far so good. Even though he hasn't hit 3 home runs in his first game or anything ridiculous like that, it's very Wieters-esque in tracking him. But it's also important to remember that he's brand new in professional ball, and let's give the guy a little bit of time to get acclimated before we start just expecting him to rake from day one.
How many pro football Hall of Famers have you spoken to on the radio in your 10-year career? Probably getting up on 60 or so, right? Like, I mean, year after year, Super Bowl, probably 5 to 10 a year, right? Like, so all of those conversations that you and I have had in recent years, all the conversations that predated you back when you were in college and in high school, listening to the show and whatnot with your dad and whatnot, all of it is coming back to life, even back to 1992 when I had a conversation with Jack Pardee, who was going to become a Hall of Famer and was a head coach for the Houston Oilers then, through now, and many of them include you, man, Rod Woodson and John Ogden and all of the stuff we've done at the Super Bowl from Orlando Pace and Derek Brooks, all of that stuff out in the BuyAToyota.com audio vault. You'll hear it here all week. But I got to get your favorite Hall of Famer. You got a favorite Hall of Famer?
Favorite Hall of Famer? I mean, you're putting me
and don't say Dallas Diamond Page.
Well, you know what? I would probably say him if I'm being totally honest, because he's a WWE Hall of Famer, keep in mind.
I should have run that. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, but I think anyone that has some tie to Baltimore, whether we're talking about a Rod Woodson, whether we're talking about a J.O., I think for me, especially having grown up here and having just been a fan at that point in their playing careers, just to then transition to being media member and talking to those guys in a different way, that's been a thrill for me. I mean, it's been a thrill certainly to talk to Hall of Famers, but definitely any of those guys with Ravens or Colts or some type of Baltimore tie makes it that much more special. Or even for that matter, when we talk to Hall of Famers and they have some special memory of Baltimore, whether it was playing the Ravens defense or playing against the Colts at Old Memorial Stadium. I mean, that's pretty special for someone who grew up in this area.
Do you think I didn't talk to Michael Strahan about losing the Super Bowl in 2001 when I talked to him?
Yeah, I mean, you had to. You have to rub it in, right? I mean, that's the first thing you say. I mean, he's not a Hall of Famer, but I can remember, Nestor, I don't know if I've ever told you this story. It was the winter after Super Bowl 35. I was my senior year of high school. My journalism class took a trip to New York City. We were outside the CBS building. Who did I see but Tiki Barber? Went up to him, and as any obnoxious fan of the Super Bowl winning team, the first thing I said was, "Hey, I'm a Ravens guy. I'm a Baltimore guy, but I just wanted to say I respect you and sorry about Super Bowl 35.
I say that to Tiki Barber when I see him, too. But he's not a Hall of Famer, so you won't hear him here this week. But you will hear over 140 conversations with Hall of Famers we've had here. Tons of stuff with Art Donovan, Lenny Moore, stuff you've never heard before. Hours with John Ogden, with Ray Lewis, with Rod Woodson, with Shannon Sharp, on and on and on. See it all in the BuyAToyota.com audio vault. Hear it all here all week long. We'll get you caught up on RG3, everything that's going on out of Ravens camp and the new quarterback and Josh Johnson and whatever Lamar Jackson's up to between now and next Thursday. You'll hear Luke do that. Luke at WNST.net. Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. I am Nasty at WNST.net. Make sure you're tuning in all week for the best of me. Be best. We are WNST.net AM 1570 and WNST Tassel Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore sports.